Welcome to Woah Drama Stories. We indulge of speaking of day-to-day troubles of human beings. Let's not wait any longer and start with the video. It was time to confront the realities. That's what I was thinking as I sat on the deck, watching the late afternoon sun bake the fields. That's what I thought, considering how much I had been avoiding returning to the family farm. My father died 3 weeks ago of a heart attack in the middle of the night, and while the funeral was fine, there was something about returning home that troubled me. At first, I assumed it was antipathy to commitment. My great-grandfather built this farm over a century ago and passed it down to his firstborn son, who passed it down to his firstborn son, who passed it down to me. I kept looking down at the envelope on my passenger seat, the one my mother had given me at the funeral. As I drove down the old country roads, I thought about my college friends and experiences, about the freedom I had in the city, and I knew that as soon as I opened that envelope, I would have to accept that it was all over, and it was my turn to carry on the family tradition. However, while I sat on the porch, I realized that it wasn't commitment that was scaring me, but something else. See, there are so many hazards in the city. Robbers, gangsters, and even random crazy that you might run into and wish you hadn't. Despite this, there is a certain familiarity with the city. There, you know you are never alone. There is always someone nearby to assist you, find you, and save you. However, in the country, you can enjoy actual seclusion. With one look around you, you realize that if something goes wrong, no one will come to your rescue. And it was this concept that was bothering me. My mother came out and joined me after a while, and she sat down. She noticed the envelope. "Still haven't opened it yet?" "No," I said. "It just didn't feel right." "He thought it was very important that you read that." She gently placed her hand on my shoulder. I sighed and gently tore into the envelope, discovering a beautifully written note. My father wrote in it about how I had grown into the man he had always envisioned for me, how glad he was to give me the farm, and how it was my job to pass the land on to the next generation. All of this made me cry, and my mother hugged me tightly. We walked back inside when I had calmed down, and I placed the letter on the old nightstand in my childhood room before getting ready for dinner. It was a great meal, a little depressing without Dad, but I had a good time catching up with my mother. It was my first true visit home in 2 years, so she had a lot to tell me about life here. She claimed that things had been rather quiet, as one would expect in a remote rural location, but there had recently been a major accident at a neighboring factory, and that a young woman had gone missing about the same time. I knew the woman's name and remembered attending high school with her. Honestly, I had a thing for her, but my mind was still concentrated on both the weight of inheriting the farm and the shadows forming outside. At night, I couldn't get to sleep. It was the first time in a long time that I had slept somewhere without light pollution, and the moonlit, starry sky was as enticing as it was provoking insomnia. The creaking and muttering of the ancient farmhouse, which let pockets of wind flow through it, didn't help either. You could almost hear a faint cry. It was unsettling at first, but I soon closed my eyes and felt my body relax. I was soon plummeting from a great height. I braced myself for the fall as my body flew down from the sky, only to wake up somewhere dark. I looked about, feeling and smelling moist mud everywhere, and as my vision adjusted, I recognized an old table. When I looked down, I realized that I was shackled to the wall by my right ankle. I heard a door creak open as I attempted to grab the edge of the table, the only discernible item. Heavy boots stomped closer and closer, followed by the distinct sound of something metallic being pulled. The noise abruptly ceased, and I could hear an old key turning a lock. I awoke lying in my bed as soon as the door was unlocked. I tried to stand up to see the time, but couldn't. Sleep paralysis, I thought. Another thing I didn't miss about the farm. But this time was different. While I was doing my usual practice of forcing myself to move till I started to budge, I felt a weight change alongside me. It was almost as if someone was in the bed with me. At the same time, the wailing sound I heard before falling asleep became increasingly louder. Right beside my ear, it sounded like a lady weeping. Whatever was beside me became restless, and I felt it rotate onto its side. The sobbing ceased. The weight vanished. I was finally able to move, and as I fought to sit up, a faint voice said, "Key letter," and I awoke again. I dragged myself out of bed as daylight spilled into my room. I noticed a piece of paper put into the bedroom door as I went to use the restroom. I took it out. It was a letter from my father. Remembering the voice from my dream, I reread it to see if there was anything significant, and as I did so, my palm brushed over something on the back of the paper. When I flipped it around, I noticed a key glued to it, as well as another note from my father. He stated in it that he knew I wasn't looking forward to taking over, but he reassured me that he had prepared the groundwork for my success. Finally, he ended the note by saying, "The farm will shower you with many presents, and here's the key to unlocking them all." "That's cute," I chuckled. "The key to the farm." I spent the remainder of the day roaming around the farm, taking in all of the old memories and exploring all of the ancient structures. I tried the key on all of the locks, but none of them seemed to work. Strange. Maybe they were modified recently, I thought to myself. In any case, they were all mine now, and as the sun began to set lower in the sky, I began to feel better about my situation. My father was a good man, and if he thought I could do it and be happy, I knew I could. As I walked back to the farmhouse, I scanned all of the farm structures to ensure that I had checked them all. Right before I turned around, I observed an old shed in a field that I hadn't checked yet. The point to grasp is that old sheds like that exist on almost every farm. Little antique structures that have long since served their purpose. You'll see them everywhere if you travel down a country road, barely standing, scarcely noticed. However, thinking about the key, I approached the shed and discovered that whatever door it once had vanished. I returned home, shrugging my shoulders. That night was much odder than the last. There was no sleep paralysis or wailing voices, only the shed. Something about it troubled me, and I assumed it was because I didn't look at it closely enough. For whatever reason, I couldn't accept that it was old and abandoned, and that night, no matter how hard I tried, it kept resurfacing in my mind. I went to bed thinking about it, dreamed about it, and awoke thinking about it. My mother prepared breakfast for me that morning. After everything was all gone, I brought up the key and questioned if the locks had been changed. "No, I don't think we've done anything to change the locks in 20 years, she replied. "Strange. I checked every building, except for that old shed in the north fields, I think," I said as I looked out at the farm. "I don't think there's anything there that would fit that key," my mother said, a bit uncomfortably. "But if you do go check it out, just be careful, okay? There's been a lot of strange noises coming out of there," she said softly. That afternoon, I went for another walk around the property, circling and circling, constantly pausing at the route to the shed. Something seemed odd about it, between my feelings, the previous night, and what my mother had said. At the same time, it was simply an empty shed, and my mother was probably correct when she said it didn't appear structurally stable. I eventually decided to return home, but as soon as I turned around, I tripped. Except I didn't walk on anything, and I almost felt pushed. When I stood up, I noticed that I was now facing the shed. I decided to go take a look after touching the key in my pocket. As soon as I went in, the strain in my body dissipated. As I expected, it was just a shed. Except for an old, wobbly table, the room was completely vacant. My key was not needed for anything. However, just as I was about to leave, something shiny caught my eye. An old tractor decal was on the table. It had probably fallen off, and my father had thrown it in there hastily. I lifted it to take a closer look, but it quickly slipped out of my grasp. I spotted a round bump on the floor as I went to pick it up. I dropped to my knees to have a better look, and discovered it was a keyhole. Uncomfortable, I took the key from my pocket and placed it in. It was effective. I slowly pulled and opened a hatch, revealing a staircase. There was also a distinct odor, which may be difficult to describe to people who are not farmers, but it smelled like a dirty chicken coop. Just the overwhelming odor of trash and heat combining. I descended into a new room, holding my breath, and as I braced myself for whatever was ahead, I heard a faint voice. "Jamie?" I swung around and gasped. There was a lady here. She was chained to the wall, with nothing but a heat light and a bucket of stagnant water around her. As I approached her, I saw how slender she was, almost like a walking skeleton with brown hair. "Help! Come help me, Jamie," she sighed. How could she know what my name was? As she attempted to gaze up at me, I realized this was the missing girl. For a little while, I was stunned before grasping the gravity of the situation. "It'll be all right," I murmured, not knowing if that was true. "I'm going to get help." I spun around and dashed towards the ladder. I saw something weird as I gripped the first rung. When I looked attentively, I noticed a piece of paper wrapped around it. I took a look inside. "How do you like your gift?" said another note from my father. Story 2. To improve our relationship, our therapist suggests we do it on Halloween on his mother's grave. But Robert appears to be hesitant. I mean, I have my own reservations. Lying and humping on the cold stone. You know how it is after 40. Sleeping with the wrong pillow can cause a back injury. So I asked Mandy, our wonderful therapist, if I could use my yoga mat to cover the gravestone. She stated that she did not see a problem with that. Mandy is incredible. She explained it so well. Sex is the opposite of death, so having sex on his mother's grave will obviously exorcise her ghost, which haunts our relationship like a demon. Mandy studied anthropology before becoming a therapist, and she claims it gave her a great deal of insight into the socioculture construction of death. And I can't explain it as well as she does, but basically how society tells us to feel about death. But Robert is still not convinced. His mother had been nothing but an unwelcome presence in our lives for a long time. She constantly commented on everything, no matter how small. Our food, our furniture, our vacation, opening and closing our fucking windows in our own goddamn house. Everything. She never felt the need to talk to us or ask about us. She just wanted to give us her unsolicited advice and tell us how to do things better. It got so bad that eventually we just stopped inviting her to our family events. It was the only way we could make her stop trying to control our lives. But even after we'd cut her off completely, she continued to come over uninvited and commandeer our kitchen. Even though Robert would see how much she affected our lives, he still would not tell her to stop coming over. I never understood why he was so reluctant to stand up to his mother. I always had to be the bad guy, making up excuses to not let her be around us, unapologetically controlling our lives. She eventually died last year, thanks to a little anthropological technique I learned from Mandy. It was quick and painless, and given how seniors are treated nowadays, they should be grateful. Mandy claims that other cultures respect their elders. Ha! But then something odd happened. His mother began to manifest in Robert. I could see her in him, the look in his eyes, the disapproving twist in his lips when she didn't like something, when Robert didn't agree with something. Even when someone said something mean about his mother in front of his face, you could see it mirrored in his eyes. This worried me. This made me worried about my relationship. Had his mother come all the way again only to ruin my life? I thought that at first it was something I did wrong. I could fix our relationship if I did something different. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't the case at all. It wasn't anything I had done to cause this. This was just happening naturally, and I could not have his mother hack my relationship even from beyond the grave. Mandy explained that it was completely normal, and that having sex on her grave on Halloween would completely remove her from Robert's body. "Would you please, sweetheart?" I begged him, putting my hand on his arm. "We could dress up as we used to, remember? It would be a lot of fun. People would think we were a couple of jerks." He shifted his gaze away from the window. I looked downcast at Mandy. She smiled kindly at me, that wonderful smile that instantly makes me feel better. "Remember what I said about there being no point in insisting or forcing. For the method to be effective, he must truly desire to be healed," she spoke softly. I exhaled a sigh. She was correct. As a result, I may have to resort to Plan B. If he continues to be stupid, I may resort to using the same technique I used on his mother on him. I'll get his mother out of my life, one way or another. Story 3. I'm a 28-year-old man, and my girlfriend broke up with me a few months ago. Naturally, I was devastated and gave myself time to heal. My friends were constantly trying to cheer me up and talking about how I should use a dating app to move on. I gave it no thought because I wasn't ready at the moment, but as time has been passing, I'm finding myself being drawn to the idea. I feel like it could be a liberating experience for me. So one day after work, I decided to give it a shot and finally made a profile for myself. I browsed it for quite some time, but didn't swipe right on anyone. Just when I was about to give up, I saw a woman who caught my attention. She was beautiful, dressed in a red dress, and was holding a baby in her arms. Before I had a chance to talk myself out of it, I swiped right and we matched. We started talking, and that's when I found out that the kid in her arms was her kid. That was absolutely fine by me. I like kids, and I don't have any problems dating someone who is a parent. After chatting for a while, she invited me to have dinner with her at her place on the weekend. This particular weekend, her kid was going to be with the dad. She mentioned she wanted to smoke because she couldn't do that with her kid around, so I brought a J. Went over, and her house was decent. She had a big sectional couch, and she sat right next to me. I fired up the J, passed it to her, and she hits it a few times and gives it back to me. I hit it as well and offer it to her, then she says no thanks. Okay, no big deal. I put it out. She then gets up after a minute and goes into the other room. When she comes back, she's sitting on the other side of the couch and not talking at all. It was then that I noticed she has something in her hand, and she has a death grip on it. I'm talking white knuckles. I ask her if she is okay, and she says, "The voices in my head are telling me to stab you." And at this point, I notice what she is holding is a knife, a sharp one. I stared at her all wide-eyed, and then I laughed awkwardly. She didn't say anything at all. She was just staring at me like she would attack me at any time. I then asked her to use her bathroom, got up and started walking, and saw that the garage door was open. I didn't even hesitate for a second. I ran out the door and didn't stop until I was pretty far away from her house. Update. I called the cops after running out in case she harmed herself. I told them that I met her for the first time and that she has a child also. They rushed to her house and found her sitting in the same spot that I left her. After treatments and everything, she was diagnosed with some mental problems. She was dangerous to herself and her child, so she was admitted to a facility and her child was taken to the dad. I'm just glad I came out of it alive. This was my first dating app experience, and I don't think I need a second one.